Well, Francisco Sharry is doing an incredible job. He's put together a juggernaut coalition that I think would have, in no one's dream, would have been possible a few years ago, and put it together for the right reasons. And clearly, he's in this debate. He's all over this debate. He's one of the leading voices of calm and reason and doing the right thing. So I'd like him to speak and give us a few words today. Thank you, Frank.
Well, good morning. I work with a group called the National Immigration Forum, which I have to say is a nonpartisan group. It's in our interest to have both parties competing for immigrant voters. But I have to say that NDN actually sought us out. And this was before the issue became such a hot issue on the front pages. It was when we had just gotten our butts kicked in the House, and Simon reached out and he said, I really want to work on this issue. We want to take this on. We think this is really what the New Democratic Network is all about. And that's rare in my line of work. Most people run the other way when we come knocking. And NDN has run to the gunfire on this, and we have benefited enormously from their support. So I want to salute NDN for its work on this. But it doesn't really surprise me given where NDN stands, because what we're talking about in this immigration debate, and I think Simon captured it, we have a 1950s set of policies and understandings and a 21st century labor market reality. You know, I was a strong supporter, it was very controversial among progressive allies of ours. Our group supported the Clinton administration buildup on the border in the 1990s. Because we thought in the wake of Proposition 187, and we saw how public angst was going to lead to a ferocious backlash that was going to lead to all manner of horrible laws, which indeed it did, but that we needed to have a response that was legitimate. And we thought that the deterrence approach at the border was legitimate and was thoughtful and might actually work. This is how naive we were in retrospect. And in the late 90s, some of my progressive friends said, you really got to go to Mexico and check out a sending community. And they brought me and a bunch of us to a little town called Tixla in the state of Guerrero. And we met with the townspeople, which wasn't hard because there weren't many left. It was mainly elderly folks, some women, and young children, because everybody, men and women, from about the age of 15 on, was up in the Chicago area working in landscaping and hotels and restaurants and so forth. And they were so proud because they had just built a new school with their pooled remittances that had been sent back from their relatives. And they showed us the school, and then they showed us the new basketball court. And right in the middle was a perfect replica of the Chicago Bulls logo in a dusty town in nowhere, Mexico. And it just hit us. It's like, my goodness, this is a bedroom community for Chicago. They produce the workers for the available jobs in Chicagoland. It's a long commute. It's a dangerous commute. Over 450 people have died this year trying to come to fill available jobs. Dig that. People are dying to come here to work in jobs that are going begging because we don't have a modern system to accommodate it, to regulate it. So, now, how do you deal with that? So, does that mean that border enforcement doesn't work and can't work? Of course not. In fact, one of my favorite quotes is an F. Scott Fitzgerald quote. He said, the sign of first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two seemingly contradictory ideas in your head at the same time and retain the ability to function. And that's what this immigration package before the Senate does. It walks and chews gum at the same time. It says we can have a law enforcement bill that is tougher than any enforcement package we've ever had, and we can open up legal channels for the future flow and bring people out of the shadows who are already here. Do both. Bring immigration out of the shadows and under the rule of law. I mean, I see this as we're building a regulatory regime that doesn't exist. In the same way that we built labor laws at the turn of the last century that now exist, that regulate how people are hired and what their minimum wages are and what they can do if they're abused in the workplace. We have an immigration system where there is no functioning regulatory system. So when people say, oh, you want to open borders, oh, you guys are soft. We're the immigration control advocates. We're the ones who want a regulatory regime that brings immigration into legal channels so people are screened and vetted. They're here legally and with labor rights. And most importantly, they're not a permanent second-class group of non-citizens. There's a path to citizenship. That's what the Senate package is. I know the press is trying to learn this issue and it's hard, and I know our language is about guest workers. I'm telling you, what's on the Senate floor is not a guest worker program. The Kennedy-McCain package for the future flow has more family visas so people are reunited in a more timely fashion with a path to citizenship. A temporary worker program with a radical notion that workers can self-petition for permanent residence. They don't have to rely on an employer, because the closer the tie is with an employer, quite frankly, the more susceptibility there is or vulnerability there is to abuse in that relationship. So a path to citizenship for temporary workers. These aren't guest workers, these are future citizens. And then what about the people here? The very controversial issue of the 11 or 12 million people here. Well, the House has a solution. Let's criminalize people and make them felons. Let's make sure we've threatened priests and nuns with jail time. Let's have an untested worker verification system, and in 3 years, re-verify 140 million employees. And then let's hope that they go home and stop coming. That would be calling not holding two ideas in your head at the same time. Enforcement only. Now, we all know it was drive-by legislating because the Republicans often mistake talk radio hosts for their base. And as Joe Lieberman himself often says, the anti-immigrant crowd is very loud, but not very large. They seem to project a lot of power. It looks like they're a majority. They represent about 10% of the voters in this country. Most Americans aren't upset at immigrants. They're upset at the failure of political leadership to solve the problem. What they want is a regulatory regime that works. They want someone to mind the store, and they are right. They are right. So the question is not, do we bring it under control, but how? Enforcement only? Oh, or maybe a 2,000-mile wall. A little too radical? Let's make it 700 miles, which is what the House bill does. Could you imagine if we built a wall between our friendly trading partner, Mexico, and Latin America? This has touched off a huge diplomatic crisis in Latin America. The idea that the United States, at a time of integration of the hemisphere, would be building a wall is deeply offensive to our friends and neighbors. I imagine if we do build the wall, someday soon, a young, charismatic president of Mexico or Central America will go to that wall with a gaggle of reporters, and you know what he'll say, right? Mr. President, tear down this wall. Now, the Senate has taken a different approach. Let's figure out how we have a virtual fence with a combination of agents, technology, and infrastructure. But let's face it, we're not going to solve this problem of illegal immigration at the border alone. We've tried that for 20 years, and it has failed. Necessary, but insufficient. The real frontier in immigration enforcement is at the workplace. And we need to have a worker verification system that operates like a credit card system, that's easy for employers, that determines whether people have status, that's connected to databases that work. Not easy and essential. That is the key. But if we only do that, on top of 11 to 12 million people here illegally and 500,000 who come every year illegally to fill available jobs, we're smoking something. We have to make sure that we have a legal system in which people can use the legal channels and no other. But if we don't have wide legal channels and tight enforcement, we won't have the regulation that the public rightly demands. And so that's why we need some sort of worker program and family program. Now, I get the debate, oh my God, we're increasing immigration. Not if we do it right. We're increasing the legality of immigration. There's 500,000 people coming and settling every year. You want a bad guest worker program? We've got it. The status quo. That's a bad guest worker program. You come without vetting, you come without labor rights, you're susceptible to exploitation, you're afraid to join a union, you're afraid to speak up, you have no political rights. Brilliant. Or we have a program that substitutes the illegal flow for a legal flow. You come on an airplane instead of across the desert. You are vetted before you come. You come with full labor rights and a path to citizenship. You can change jobs after you're here. Remarkable. Senator Kennedy was in a meeting the other day. He said, I know there's a lot of folks on our side of the aisle that seem to think that this temporary worker program is bad for workers, but in all my years, I've never seen a proposal that better protects workers. This is a pro-worker bill. I know people don't understand it, but we've got to communicate that it does. This is pro-worker. Workers coming with rights. That's why the Change to Win folks are on board with this. Sure, the nature of the labor protections and the nature of the tie to employers, the details matter greatly. But the idea right now is that the reality right now is that we have low-wage labor markets in which there's a large number of people who are scared to stand up for their rights with reduced bargaining power that affects all low-wage workers. When there was a legalization program in the 1980s, they studied the people who got green cards, about 3 million people. Within 5 years, there was a 14% increase in wages and a corresponding increase in productivity as workers studied English and joined job training programs because they knew they would be more deeply rooted. A win-win for low-wage labor markets. Remarkable. So when people say, oh, this is some giveaway to corporate America, man, they haven't worked with undocumented workers like I have. I'm telling you, we just did a survey with Sergio Bendixen about how many interviews with undocumented immigrants from Latin America. You want to come forward and legalize your status? Would you be willing to go through all those hoops of learning English and paying back taxes and paying a fine and registering with the government, submitting to security proceedings? 98% said yes. Why do you think people are rallying the way they're rallying? That House bill that told hardworking, tax-paying